The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm your host, Charles Christian, and thank you for joining us once again. As ever, we have our usual eclectic mix, including a long tale about a Saxon king who apparently returned from the dead to kill a Viking warlord. And not just any Saxon king, but the one-time patron saint of England. Yep, St. Edmund. We've also got a piece about the ghosts of Nashville in Tennessee. And Janie's going to be here talking about prepping, some of the more practical aspects of it. Anyway, sit back, listen, and enjoy. Now, as you hopefully know, we did run a quick ad for it last time. I'm also now producing a weekly Americana music radio show. And indeed, some of you will have already heard it. And one of the things connected with that got me thinking about Nashville and its ghosts. I was in Nashville 5 or 6 years ago and had a look around the place and read up on some of the haunted history of Nashville. Now, there's no shortage of ghosts in the Tennessee area. The Bell Witch is located 30 or 40 miles or so from Nashville, and there are, because there was so much fighting in the American Civil War, or the war between the states, depending on how you like to call it, there's plenty of military-type ghosts floating about the place, and indeed several in Nashville, which was the scene of fighting, and in many instances, buildings that are still there on Broadway in Nashville, their basements were taken over in the war and used as hospitals and surgeries and the like. However, I'm more interested in the music side of it. So we start off with the Ryman Auditorium, which for many years was the home of the Grand Ole Opry. And it began life in 1892 when a Captain Ryman, Captain Thomas Ryman, opened it up as a church, a gospel tabernacle. When he died some 12 years later, the building was renamed the Ryman Auditorium and was used as an entertainment venue, which it has been pretty much ever since. That, incidentally, is also why it is known as the Mother Church of Country Music, because, of course, it was a church and it was where the Grand Ole Opry started. So who are the ghosts there? Well, not surprisingly, one of them is Captain Ryman himself. And he's been known to voice his opinion if he's not impressed by the performances. This was particularly the case in the early years when it was more of a music hall and you would have not just country being played, but you'd also have comedians and relatively risque acts there. And he's been known to make crashing noises to deafen performances if he doesn't like them. There's also a repeatedly reported ghost of the Grey Man, a figure seen sitting up in the balcony during rehearsals. And when people have gone up there to say that, there's somebody sitting in the balcony, you shouldn't be there, it's closed, there's nobody there. It has been suggested he might be a Confederate soldier. They wore grey, but of course the Ryman building wasn't constructed until nearly 30 years after the Civil War. However, there were plenty of Confederate army reunions, and it's thought it's quite likely it's the ghost of a former Confederate soldier who visited the Ryman either when it was still a church or later in its early days as a music hall. And another slightly surprising ghostly visitor is Elvis Presley. Now, Elvis, in his very, very early years, did a gig at the Ryman for the Grand Ole Opry, and apparently it didn't go down very well at all. He was into full teenage swivelling hips mode, and the audience didn't like it, and he was sent off, told, go back to your job as a truck driver. You ain't ever going to have a career in music. Little did they know. Anyway, Elvis is said to haunt the dressing rooms, and indeed Lisa Marie Presley, that's his daughter, the one who married Michael Jackson, she once performed at the Ryman, and she said she definitely heard her father's laugh from the other side of the door to her dressing room, and it was initially jammed, and she pushed it, and she could hear her father laughing at the other side. This, I should hasten to add, was after he'd died. And then he opened it, the door suddenly opened, and no one was there. So that's gone down as one of the other ghosts. And of course, being a church and being teetotal, if you wanted a drink when you were performing at the Grand Ole Opry, you'd go out of the one of the side doors at the back, down a lane, onto Broadway, where you would find Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. It's a little honky-tonk bar. It's definitely orchid coloured because it's painted purple, and it's named after Tootsie Bess, who ran it for many years as a place for country stars to come in after playing at the Ryman to enjoy food and drinks. And it's said actually that her spirit still haunts the venue, but one of the other better known spirits who was there long before Tootsie herself is Hank Williams. That's Hank Williams Sr. or Hank Williams Mark I, because he had a son, still has a son, called Hank Williams Jr. or Hank Williams II, who's a country singer, and he in turn has a son also called Hank Williams or Hank Williams III. So we're dealing with the first of the Hank Williams. And he liked to drink or three, and indeed got fired from the Grand Ole Opry for his drinking, but he was known to sneak out and go down there to Tootsie's and have a quick snifter. And it's said that he's still to be seen in there occasionally having a drink, and it's even said that sometimes he appears on the stage there. He did do some gigs there. It's thought his ghostly image appears. As for Tootsie herself, apparently her foible as a ghost is to tap her fingers noisily at the end of the bar if she's not impressed by one of the musical acts. And one final ghost to talk about. It's at the Ernest Tubb Record Store. Now, you can't miss the Ernest Tubb Record Store. It's, again, on Broadway, and it's got a huge illuminated guitar that revolves outside it and stays open all hours. Now, this does have a Civil War connection because its basement was used as a morgue during the war, but it's also got a apparently haunted CD player that contains all the CDs that they stock, and it's been known to start playing with no human intervention when people are talking about a particular musician. So somebody says, "Ooh, have you got anything by Roy Acuff?" Famous old country singer. And suddenly a Roy Acuff track will start playing on the CD player. And should you ever be in Nashville, all of those venues, Ernest Tubbs, Tootsie's and the Auditorium, the Ryman, are all within 5 minutes walking distance of each other. Right, well, here's Janie, and we've both been looking at various news reports recently about people investing in zombie-proof bunkers and prepping for the apocalypse, whatever apocalypse it might be. And so we've been looking at some of the practical aspects, and here's Janie to tell a little bit more.
Here I am. And it was really sparked by a little bit of Brexit here and people possibly getting a bit worried about that. And I've been looking into what's available for such situations. And in this country, well, frankly, nothing. They're stocking up on baked bean production, basically, I think. That's as far as we've gone. And toilet rolls. Because bread, toilet rolls and baked beans, British people virtually sorted through any crisis.
Yeah.
So,
beans on toast.
Yes, and then the required toilet paper. Okay. However, abroad, in other areas, they're just a tiny bit more advanced than us. Viz, the latest news that I know about, anyway, I don't think maybe it's how news it is, but yes, it's a 3 million doomsday condo that has been built in, I think it's in Wichita. Have I got that right? Yeah. And in America, obviously. And it can take 75 people. I don't know if that's families or just individuals, but the point is this has been built to accommodate them and keep them alive for 5 years, which is quite extraordinary. So, what it is, right? Okay, so during the Cold War, the government of the US, they built lots of these missile silos in secret locations. And, of course, a lot of them are empty now. But, and obviously we can't disclose the location, but north of Wichita, which is in Kansas, as everybody knows, has been purchased and then turned into a doomsday-proof condo. A luxury one at that, I have to say. And it's great, I feel like. USP is that you can live off grid on it for about 5 years. So it's got water filtration system, separate water sources, aquaponic farming, hydroponic food, and 3 different power supplies.
Yes.
So about 20 million it cost to convert it. So I think it's about 12 families can live there. Anyway.
Yeah.
So it's 15 stories deep. Walls are 9 foot deep. Thick. That is.
Yeah.
And that apparently will withstand a nuclear impact. So they worked out how to live there with a swimming pool. People will want gyms, rock climbing walls, dog parks, movie theatre. And they're apparently going to also have a sort of 4-hour work day, so everybody has a purpose and meaning and go to work for 4 hours. Yeah. They've sold every unit before construction ended.
Yes. I think the price is 3 million, isn't it, for each unit?
Yeah. So there we are. Apparently, though, natural disasters cause big spikes in doomsday preparation. About 15% growth in sales since the Trump election. That's not obviously a natural disaster. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, just coincidentally.
Yes. Every time there's a big hurricane that strikes through.
Yeah. And it's quite a big market, it turns out. Well, it's in the States, obviously. We're not quite as big here with our beans and our...
No.
Yeah. 2012, it was 500 million. The government spends about 1 billion, allegedly, on this sort of preparation. And Yeah, so millionaires are obviously able to buy themselves 5 years in a bunker underground. And apparently there's another silo, which is about 3 times the size. It's also being turned into luxury apartments as well. So, there's where the property market is going in this country, hopefully. So, of course, we haven't got any. We might have 1 or 2. There you are. So that's in America.
Yep.
But it's not just in America. Oh, no. There's
Tell me
also, well, this is further news about something called the Safe House, which is just outside Warsaw in Poland. And it's apparently claimed to be the world's first zombie-proof house. Yeah. And it's basically, if you imagine a massive monolith, that's what it looks like when it's all closed up. So it's a massive concrete cube surrounded by a massive concrete wall.
Yeah.
And what it is, the cube has sliding exterior walls and windows that can be covered by massive concrete slabs, which must be on some sort of hydraulic system or something. Because when they open out, and the whole front of the building is an aluminium roll-down gate with concrete across that. So all that can slide up and windows open, and it looks just like a normal house. Sort of press a button and it will go, and it becomes this, great big concrete slab. And nothing will get through that. Well, certainly no zombies will get through that.
No zombies will come through that.
It took 3 years to build. It was actually completed in 2008. I say it's got a great big wall around it. And inside, lovely little home. I imagine that is somebody lives there who's very, very rich.
Yes.
The aluminium gate doubles as a movie screen.
Yes.
So
that's only when you're on the outside.
Yes.
You wouldn't be sitting out there watching a movie when the zombies are running around.
No.
And it's got a drawbridge or something to get into the top of it.
Yes, it's got a swimming pool outside, but that can be immediately enclosed in concrete, and it is accessed by a drawbridge, because zombies, they don't like drawbridges, don't like water at all. No. And that leads to a roof terrace and the pool.
Yeah.
And it's probably, it's got, the yard includes outdoor seating. I'm reading estate agents' particulars here. Anyway, I don't know any details of cost on that one.
No.
But, so there we are.
Yep.
Which moves me on to
food. We've been discussing baked beans.
Well, obviously, if you're, holed up in your bunker in the silo or on the concrete cube.
You need some food.
Yes, you do. Unless you're going to grow it yourself, which, of course, that has the hydroponic thing. But no, apparently there's lots of information available, which I've been finding out about what foods you should take with you into your zombie-proof bunker, because some of it's going to go off, hasn't it? It's no good taking the bread in there, folks. That's only going to last a little while in the freezer, but no. So, right, let's have a run through quickly.
The other point, of course, is depending on where you are, there might not be electricity.
No.
And therefore your freezer's out.
Exactly. So most of these things will last for years. Well, a year. Up to forever. Which is kind of neat. Now, the first one, we wouldn't really have imagined this. Honey. Honey. Well, you can eat it well past its expiration date, and apparently it never goes off.
Oh, right.
And all it might do is crystallise,
yes.
which is not a sign of it being off.
Yeah.
And you just heat it and it would uncrystallise.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's apparently the only food that can last forever. I know. Mainly because it's made up of sugar, which I thought was bad and caused diseases and bad teeth. But the sugar means that there's apparently very, very low moisture, and very few bacteria or microorganisms can survive in that environment. And actually, a friend has just cured herself a very, very, very bad throat with manuka honey. Yeah. And I said, why? I don't know. They just say it's got great antibacterial thingies. Anyway, yeah. So get yourself some honey, and can also clearly be used medicinally.
Yes.
Uncooked rice can last 30 years. So, uncooked it is. So students, listen to that bit. 30 years as if you haven't actually already taken it back from the takeaway place and put it under your bed and going to eat it later. So between 25 and 30 years if it's uncooked. Peanut butter doesn't need any refrigeration and doesn't basically go off. And, of course, is a great source of protein.
Yes.
But you'd never put peanut butter in the fridge, would you? Can you imagine trying to eat that? Spread it on your bread.
It's too thick. It's solid. Goes like a brick.
Work.
Yep.
You could throw it at the zombies, possibly. But, So, yes, peanut butter can keep for at least 3 to 5 years. It's the high amount of fat and vitamin E, and it staves off oxidation and prolongs its shelf life. It could perhaps become a little less appetising in its flavour and odour, but you really wouldn't. It wouldn't hurt you to eat it, even if it tasted a bit bad, which does surprise me. I must admit. Alcohol. Alcohol doesn't perish easily. Well, vodka, whiskey, rum, going to stay drinkable forever, really, as long as they're stored and sealed. Clearly. Keep out of direct heat and sunlight. And don't have things that contain dairy and cream, but then...
Yes.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, some of those...
would you anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those things that people give you at Christmas. Your warnings, Advocar. Yep. Just say no.
Yeah, well, drink them first.
Yep.
You don't care about the rest then, do you, really? Or the fact that dried beans last indefinitely. Okay.
What sort of beans? Any
dried beans? Well, I'm thinking pinto beans and lentils, that sort of thing, I imagine. I wouldn't like to specifically say. But yes, some samples of beans have been stored up to 30 years and were 80% acceptable in a consumer taste panel. Which is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Canned beans, obviously, things in cans can last many, many years.
Yeah.
Especially if they're in a cool, dry place, because it would only be damp and corrosion of the tin that would cause you a problem. Energy bars, they're a must.
Really?
Yes, they're really good because obviously they're packed with protein and they do tend to last forever. Quick fuel in an emergency, and they're kind of easy to pack and
they're
travel.
sort of dried grain and nuts, aren't they?
Nuts and
dried fruit,
oats and fruit, and basically. Certain types of candy can last up to a year. So again, I suppose they would do really because that's the sugar thing. Candy cane, which is more kind of American, we would call it rock.
Yes,
I think that's reckoned to last up to a year.
Yeah.
Dark chocolate, jellied candies, caramel, that can all last a year. But candy corn, chewing gum, milk and white chocolate, though, not so good.
Oh.
Yeah. Dehydrated meat, that can also last for a year. I suppose that's, again, not something we tend to have in this country. I mean, things like beef jerky.
Yes.
I think it's called. Yeah. Homemade lean cuts, dehydrated of meat with salt and hot pepper will last up to 2 months, according to the USDA. Using a hydrator instead of an oven, vacuum sealing it and freezing the meat can extend its shelf life. Yum. Really good. You can buy store-bought stuff, though, which has got a preservative in it, which extends its life quite a bit longer. Bullion cubes.
Yep.
Yeah, they can last well past their expiration.
Yes.
Expiration date.
Yes, that's OXO cubes for people in the UK.
Yes. And I can give a personal testament to that.
Oh, right.
Oh, yes, because I have to shamefully say that not fairly recently I did find some herbs and some stock cubes that dated from the 1990s. 1995, I think. I didn't use them, you'll be glad to hear. That tummy ache you had the other day is absolutely nothing to do with using those.
Absolutely, I'll take the word for it.
No. So then, canned fruit, vegetables, soups, 1 to 5 years you're looking at. Yeah. I think that's it. On the canned foods, things like tomatoes and fruits, I think, they probably go off a bit earlier because they're quite high acid.
Yeah, but it's going off because it's attacking the tin.
Yeah. Yes, exactly, yeah. But low acid canned foods, meats, vegetables will keep for 2 to 5 years, which is heck of a long time. Yeah. Powdered milk. That will last a very long time. And it might have a best by date of 18 months or so, but actually it will probably last indefinitely.
Yeah.
Again, it's how you store it.
Yeah.
Spruce Eats. Can I mention a name of a company? Anyway, they reported that some survivalist stores sell non-fat powdered milk, claiming it has a shelf life of 25 plus years.
Ooh.
Quite extraordinary.
Yep.
Which would be nice because also instant coffee to get your caffeine fix, that's going to last a very long time. 2 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, obviously because there's no sugar, fat, wheat or whatever, moisture inside that sort of thing, freeze-dried type of coffee. So now this is one again, UK, we wouldn't quite know what this was, but I can explain. Hardtack, which was a biscuit kind of thing, made with flour, salt and water, and it was a type of cracker that was popular as a Civil War ration.
It was also popular in the Royal Navy back in the days of sailing ships. They used to have hardtack, and it was part of the ritual that you would break your hardtack and tap it on the table to shake out any bugs. Because you'd get things...
Yes, weevils.
Weevils getting into it.
That's right, yeah.
Because it wasn't stored well.
Absolutely,
but was otherwise edible.
You can sort of dip them in water or fry them with butter to make them edible. Quite versatile, isn't it? Just a humble bicky.
Yep.
Pure vanilla extract lasts forever. Yeah. Although you usually buy it in a sugary, syrupy thing or sometimes in almost like alcohol. So I don't know where you'd ever get pure vanilla extract and whether that's liquid or powder, I don't know. But it does make things taste better and it does make them taste sweet.
Yes.
It fools the palate to thinking it's kind of sweet. But yeah, so that's it. So I think, if you could survive quite happily on that lot, obviously.
You'd need water as well.
Yes, you would need water. Absolutely. You can buy canned water now, can't you? Because we had some recently.
Yes. Yeah.
Funny taste, but yeah. So get down to the co-op now. Get your hardtack.
Get me hardtack. Put an order in for some honey hardtack.
And what was the other weird thing?
The
beef
dried
jerky.
meat. Beef jerky.
Beef
yes.
jerky, yeah. So there we are. We're all prepped. We're all ready. We just need to be millionaires, billionaires, live in Poland or the US.
Yes, we've just got to get the bunker sorted.
Yes, just a minor
We've got the
detail to
food,
get-
but we haven't got the bunker.
No. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.
That's very helpful.
Good.
Good. Thank you, Janie.
I say goodbye.
Good. Bye-bye.
Back to my bunker. You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
And now for our big story. It is the strange death and afterlife of King Edmund. Or did a martyred Saxon king return from the grave to kill a Viking warlord? And those of you who've been watching the TV series The Vikings will recall that the lead character for the first 4 or 5 seasons was a character called Ragnar Lodbrok. Well, we're going to be encountering him in this story as well. So, let's start at the beginning. Over the past decade, there have been a couple of public campaigns here in the UK to drum up support for removing St George as the patron saint of England and replacing him with St Edmund, the man who was the country's original heavenly patron for over 400 years from the early 10th century onwards. Both campaigns have failed, but they did serve to reignite interest in St Edmund. So who was he and what's his story? The setting is the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of the East Angles, which occupies modern-day Norfolk, Suffolk, and part of the Lincolnshire Fens. In the year AD 869, on the throne is King Edmund, a young and devout Christian monarch who was only 14 years old when the time he was crowned in AD 855, so he'd be about 28 at this time we're talking about. Now, for the previous 60 years, the Viking raiders from Scandinavia had been carrying out ever more bloody hit-and-run attacks on England. But in 865, thousands of Danes and Norwegian Vikings, described in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as the Great Heathen Army, landed in their longships along the coast of Suffolk and launched an all-out invasion. History says that the king, that's King Edmund, was on a pilgrimage at this crucial time, so in his absence, his courtiers and ealdormen, nobles, supplied the Vikings with horses, both as a bribe to deter them from looting and pillaging the local area, but also as a none-too-subtle hint and encouragement for them to move out of East Anglia and raid other parts of the country. Such apparent treacherous disloyalty in the face of a common foe might seem shocking by modern standards, but there was no love lost in these times between England's 7 rival Saxon kingdoms. These were Northumbria, Wessex and Mercia, and then the smaller, less powerful kingdoms of East Anglia, Kent, Essex and Sussex. And in East Anglia, there was no love lost for the other kingdoms, as over the previous 2 centuries, several of its monarchs had been deposed, executed, murdered, or killed in battle by rulers of the other kingdoms. The East Anglian bribery stratagem certainly seems to have worked, and for the next few years, the Vikings fought their way up and down England, destroying the old dynasties and eventually creating their own separate province, known as the Danelaw, from across the north and east of the country, Yorkshire, Lancashire, parts of Lincolnshire. Among the Saxon rulers overthrown was King Ella of Northumbria, who was killed in a battle outside the city of York in 867. And for those of you who are interested in this, in Saxon times, Northumbria meant all the land north of the River Humber and south of the Scottish border, as opposed to just Northumberland as it does now. And at this point, we must pause our narrative for a brief comparison of almost contemporaneous historical chronicles written by Saxon churchmen versus the Norse sagas, which were composed by poets some 200 or 300 years later, primarily as entertainment. Now, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, King Ella was slain in battle. However, according to the Norse sagas, he was hunted down by the legendary 6 sons of the equally legendary Viking hero Ragnar Lodbrok, who, some years previously, Ella had caused to be executed by having Ragnar thrown into a pit of poisonous snakes. The Vikings in the heathen army, who had a long memory for grievances, as King Edmund would subsequently learn to his cost, took their revenge on King Ella by subjecting him to the ritual of the blood eagle. This was a prolonged torture leading to death, involving disemboweling, evisceration, ribs being cut, and the pulling the victim's lungs out over his shoulders so they looked like the blood-stained folded wings of an eagle. Very gory. However, it's worth noting there is some controversy as to whether the blood eagle was an actual historical ritual or merely a gory literary device created by the authors of the Norse sagas and later embellished by Victorian-era historians and writers to maximise the horror. Similarly, apart from the sagas and more recently the TV series Vikings, there is no proof Ragnar Lodbrok actually met his end being thrown into a pit of snakes. Now, there are people, I'll call them the revisionists, who tend to take the view the Vikings were misunderstood economic migrants on the receiving end of bad press from the contemporary Christian monastic chronicles. And they will tell you the concept of the blood eagle was just a mistake in translation. There's also a suggestion the phrase refers to the Viking habit of leaving their foes lying dead, face down on the battlefield, for their backs to be torn open by birds scavenging for carrion. So if King Ella was killed in battle, then he would have created a blood eagle, even if the Vikings didn't carry out the ritual of it. However, as we'll see later in this story, the Vikings fully deserve their traditional reputation for being perceived as greedy, bloodthirsty psychopaths. Let's return to the great heathen army. After ravaging the rest of England for the better part of 5 years, the Vikings returned to East Anglia, attacking the kingdom's towns and slaughtering its population. This time the offer of bribes didn't work. There was no peace treaty, and in November 869, King Edmund's army met the Vikings in a battle near the modern-day town of Thetford. But what happened to change the Vikings' attitude towards the East Angles? Now, among the leaders of the great heathen army were 2 warriors called Ivar the Boneless, also known as Hingwa. It's thought he suffered from a genetic bone condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, and Uba, U-B-B-A, as opposed to A-B-B-A, who were also Scandinavian, but they took the world over by singing. Anyway, these Ivar and Uba were 2 of the many sons of the legendary chieftain Ragnar Lodbrok, who we met earlier, and who apparently did not die in a snake pit. The name Lodbrok incidentally means hairy breeches, a name Ragnar earned when he clad himself in the skin of a bear to protect himself from the poisonous breath of a dragon he subsequently fought and killed. I did say he was legendary, which is why you have him fighting dragons. And for those of you with long memories, in the 1958 movie The Vikings, Ragnar was played by Ernest Borgnine, and his sons Uba and Ivar were played by Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas. Now, according to the legend, and once again we are in that grey area with historical events and Norse mythic legends merge, some years previously Ragnar had been sailing a small boat on a wildfowling trip along the western coast of Denmark, when a storm had suddenly blown up and swept him far, far away from the coast and across the North Sea. Eventually he was washed up on the coast of East Anglia, where he was rescued and taken to Reedham, which at the time was King Edmund's royal court. Physicians nursed Ragnar back to health, and in due course King Edmund and his mysterious foreign guests struck up a friendship, as both men loved hunting. Ragnar was soon regularly accompanying Edmund on hunting trips, much to the ire of the king's chief huntsman, a man called Bern, who became increasingly jealous of the royal favour being shown to the Viking. Tragedy struck as one day, when the king was travelling elsewhere in his kingdom, Bern challenged Ragnar to a secret competition to test their respective hunting skills. The two men left Reedham that morning, but only one returned. Naturally, the king and his courtiers, when they returned, wondered what had happened to Ragnar, but Bern merely shrugged his shoulders and said, "Hadn't seen him all day." Ragnar's fate might have remained a mystery had not his hound, Garm, which had accompanied the Viking on that fateful voyage across the North Sea, but had been left behind on the morning of the secret hunting trip, begun acting aggressively toward Bern, snarling and snapping whenever he caught sight of him. Eventually Garm escaped and led some of the king's men to a shallow grave in a small lonely wood a few miles from Reedham. In the grave they found the body of Ragnar, with wounds indicating he had been stabbed to death. It was murder, and there was also evidence pointing to the culprit, for still gripped in Ragnar's cold, dead fingers was a scrap of fabric he'd torn from the clothing of his assailant in their final death struggle. The fabric was identified as part of the tunic of a royal huntsman, and when Bern's chamber was searched, the king's men found a tunic containing a matching rip in the sleeve. Ragnar was pronounced guilty by King Edmund and ordered that his punishment was to be cast adrift on an ebbing tide in the very same boat that had carried Ragnar to England. It was at this point fate took an ironic turn, for Bern did not perish in the boat, but instead was swept back across the North Sea, washing up on the very same Danish shore where Ragnar had gone missing several months previously. Recognising the boat as having belonged to their father, Ivar and Uber were keen to learn from Bern what had happened to Ragnar. Bern's treacherous explanation was that King Edmund had ordered their father to be killed and his body abandoned in a wood to deny it a proper burial. Now back to November 869, and in the words of the Anglo-Saxon chronicle, the great heathen army rode across Mercia into East Anglia and took winter quarters at Thetford, and that winter King Edmund fought against them, and the Danish took the victory and conquered all the land. In the aftermath of the defeat, Edmund and some of his retainers fled east, but became separated about 20 miles away near a settlement called Hegeldeston, where Edmund was captured by Vikings who caught him hiding beneath a bridge. Another legend has it that Edmund was captured after a wedding party. Making their way across the bridge that evening, saw the glint of moonlight reflecting on Edmund's golden spurs, and they betrayed him to the Vikings. As he was dragged away, Edmund placed a curse on all bridal couples who should ever after cross that fateful bridge. Once in the hands of Ivar, Uber and their henchmen, Edmund was roped to an oak tree, then beaten and whipped in an attempt to force him to renounce his Christian faith and to accept Ivar as his king. When Edmund refused to submit, saying he was ready to die for his people and God, the Vikings duly obliged by shooting arrows and throwing spears at him until, I'm quoting here, as if it was a game, until he was entirely covered with their missiles, like the bristles of a hedgehog. But still the Edmund didn't die, and still he continued to pray to God, so the Vikings cut his head off, and, mindful of Bern's tale of Ragnar's fate, the Vikings threw Edmund's body into a communal rubbish pit to deny it a proper Christian burial, then played football with his head until they grew bored and tossed it away into a thicket of thorns and briar. Edmund's death occurred on the 20th of November, still observed as St. Edmund's Day, and a few days later, when the Vikings moved on, some of Edmund's followers returned to the area. They recovered his body, but at first they couldn't locate his head. However, as they searched, calling out, "Where are you, friend?" Not sure why they said that. They heard the king's voice calling in the distance, "Here, here, here." They followed the source of the sound to where they found the king's head, protected from scavengers and carrion by a giant grey wolf that cradled it between his paws. The wolf immediately yielded up the head, then meekly followed Edmund's men as they took the body back to a nearby village. Once the wolf was certain the king had received a proper burial, the wolf returned to the forest and was never seen again. Now, let's have a few facts here. There are a number of places across East Anglia that claim to be the location of Hegelrichten, but the village of Hoxne, or spelled Hoxne, Hoxne, in Suffolk's Waveney Valley, is the one with the longest and firmest association, including the site of Edmund's oak, which stood in a field just outside the village until it fell down during a storm in the middle of the 19th century. Reports at the time described the oak as being ancient with a trunk over 20 feet in circumference. Within it were found old iron arrowheads, possibly the same arrows that were fired at King Edmund all those years previously. The village of Hoxne also has a Goldbrook Bridge, said to be the site of Edmund's capture, which, until relatively recently, well into the 20th century, wedding parties would still make a detour for fear of invoking the curse if they crossed it. As for the wolf, in 1890, a vicar found an old stone chest in the crypt of a church near Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. Inside was a collection of bones later identified as belonging to a large wolf. It's also worth noting King Edmund was the last member of a Saxon royal dynasty called the Woofingers, the kin of the wolf, who had ruled East Anglia since the 6th century. So perhaps Edmund's wolf knew it was guarding the last of the line. Incidentally, the first and greatest of the Woofinger kings was Redwald, who is widely believed to have been buried in the famous ship burial at Sutton Hoo near Woodbridge. However, our story does not stop with Edmund's death and his burial within a small and hastily built wooden chapel near Hoxne. Within 25 years of his death, miracles were already being ascribed to the late king's intervention, and even the Vikings, who now rule the area, were minting commemorative coins carrying the inscription Saint Edmund the King. A few years later, as the late king's cult grew, his remains were transferred to the city of Edmundsbury, which is modern-day Bury St Edmunds, and an abbey was built to house his shrine, and it soon became a popular site of pilgrimage. The reputation of Edmund, the king, and now a saintly martyr, had received a further boost after the original grave was opened. Not only was Edmund's body found to be incorrupt, in other words, showing no signs of the expected decomposition, which is always a plus point for anyone considering becoming a saint, as it's a sure sign of divine intervention, but the wounds on his body had healed and his head was once more attached to his body. All that remained to show where it had been severed was a thin red crease on the neck. Indeed, the last reported opening of Edmund's tomb was in 1198, when the body was found to still be incorrupt. One account says a sceptical monk tugged the king's hair to see if the head really was reattached to the body and was promptly slapped by the saint for his lack of faith. Possibly take that with a little pinch of salt. The next twist in our story comes in 1013, during the chaotic reign of King Ethelred the Unready. Saxons and Vikings were still at war, and after Ethelred had been forced into exile, the King of Denmark and Norway, known as Svein Forkbeard, became the King of England. He was declared King of England on Christmas Day, 1013. However, 5 weeks later, King Sweyn was dead. The official explanation was he died in his bed from injuries sustained following falling from a horse. However, another version of the story says divine vengeance put a stop to his blasphemy. The background is Sweyn and his Vikings not only seizing as much Danegeld, what we'd nowadays called protection money, from his new English subjects, but had also threatened to burn down the city of Bury St Edmunds and its abbey, as well as slaughter all its inhabitants unless they paid an additional sum of ransom money. It was then that divine intervention struck when, in the early hours of the 3rd of February 1014, the ghost of Saint Edmund, mounted on a white charger, appeared in Sweyn's bedchamber and fatally ran him through with a spear. According to the legend, although he was surrounded by his Viking warriors, it was Sweyn alone who saw King Edmund, now Saint Edmund, coming towards him. Terrified, he began shouting, "Help, fellow warriors, help! Saint Edmund is coming to kill me." But the Vikings couldn't see the ghost, which ran him through fiercely with a spear. That's quoting again the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, leaving Sweyn tormented with great pain until twilight, when he ended his life with a wretched death. Now, you may scoff at this story, and yes, a little bit far-fetched, but 6 years later, in 1020, when Sweyn's son Canute was King of England, the new monarch visited the shrine of St Edmund and bestowed on it sufficient money to replace the old wooden abbey and fund the building of a brand new Benedictine monastery, the ruins of which you can still see to this day. So perhaps Canute was fearful of a similar haunting unless he atoned for the sins of his Viking ancestors. King Svein Forkbeard, incidentally, was never actually crowned King of England. He was declared King of England, and his reign is the second shortest of any English monarch. Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day queen, holds the dubious record for the shortest rule. But our story is not yet over, for in 1217, during one of the many barons' revolts and rebellions that plagued England during the Middle Ages, a group of French knights stole St Edmund's body, or at least part of it, and whisked it away to the Basilica of Saint-Senin in the French city of Toulouse. The relics and the saints' intercessions are credited with saving the city of Toulouse from the plague in the 17th century. The next development came in 1901, when the Archbishop of Westminster received some of St Edmund's relics from Saint-Senin that were intended for the high altar of the new Roman Catholic Cathedral, then under construction at Westminster in London. Pending their getting a formal home, on their arrival the relics were placed in the Fitzapple Chapel of the Duke of Norfolk's castle in Arundel. However, plans were stalled when the antiquarian Dr. Montague Rhodes James, better known as the ghost and supernatural horror writer who we've talked about many times on this show, M.R. James, expressed concern about the relic's validity. And at the time of talking, nearly 120 years later, those plans are still stalled, and St Edmund's relics remain to this day in a box at Arundel. There is, however, another version of the story which says the monks at Bury St Edmunds moved the saint's still incorrupt body to prevent the French stealing it way back in the year 1217. So whatever their relics they made off with, they did not belong to King Edmund. Edmund's shrine was destroyed in 1539 during King Henry VIII's Reformation, and in November of that year the abbey was dissolved and the monks expelled, taking with them the secret location of the saint's final resting place. Historians now think the body is buried in the former monks' graveyard at Bury St Edmunds, which happens to lie beneath the tennis courts in the town's abbey gardens. One final little footnote here. Although the cult of St Edmund was established within 20 years of his death, he was very much a Saxon martyr and saint, and he didn't sit so well with the Normans and Plantagenet kings who followed. For the Normans, Edmund was a constant reminder that they, like their ancestors, the Vikings, were only in power because they had invaded the Kingdom of England and killed its rightful monarch. In the case of the Normans, this being King Harold Godwinson, who died at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The Normans, they could trace their lineage back to the first Duke of Normandy, a Viking freebooter called Rollo, who also appears in the TV series Vikings, who was doing to France what the great heathen army was doing to Britain at approximately the same time. As for the Plantagenets, Edmund was just a little crude and old school for their liking, and they preferred the more fashionable St. George, who echoed the notion of knightly chivalry with all those romantic tales of him rescuing damsels in distress and slaying dragons. The decline of St. Edmund can be traced to the Third Crusade, which ended in 1192 when King Richard the Lionheart visited the tomb of St. George in Lydda, in the Holy Land, Palestine, on the eve of a battle. The next day he was victorious and subsequently adopted St. George as his personal patron and protector of the army. Then, 150 years later, in 1348, King Edward III founded a new order of chivalry called the Knights of the Garter and named St. George as both the patron of the order and the patron saint of England. And that, incidentally, is why a Roman soldier who is born in what is now Syria and who never set foot in England is now the patron saint of England, and also of Georgia, Portugal and Malta, as well as being one of the official patron saints of at least a dozen other countries who have multiple patron saints, whereas Edmund, who was English and died fighting for his country, is a historical footnote. That's it. We're out of time. I'm Charles Christian. I'd like to thank you for being with us for the last hour. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Janie and I will be back same time next week. Stay well, stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.